So Mains was the guy who was essentially running this service that boys were being brought to men, and many of whom were very influential in Northern Ireland society. Was McGrath just watching that, or was he also introducing people he knew into that setup?
I think he was initially on the fringes of that, but I think he was aware of what was going on, and that was the valuable information that he could pass on to his MI5 handlers. So McGrath initially was on the outside, but there was a growing suspicion that McGrath's influence was reaching into the paedophile ring. He was aware of the boys who were in the paedophile ring, and therefore he would target them as easily persuaded to be available for him whenever he wanted to have sex with a boy. And that essentially was what was going on.
So did MI5 know he was of that persuasion and that he was doing that, or did they think they had just put somebody in to watch this? Were they aware? I mean, that's really a big question, isn't it? That he was also engaging in these attacks and rapes of young boys. Well,
MI5 in 1971 were very keen to find out what was going on with unionism, particularly within Paisley. McGrath was one of Paisley's lieutenants in that time. And so MI5 were anxious to get an informant or an agent. In this case, it was an agent, and his name was James Miller. He's now deceased. But Mr. Miller was asked by MI5, get you into Tara and report what's happening. MI5 would be happy to have two agents in the same place because that would either provide corroboration or otherwise. So this particular agent, James Miller, fought hard to get into McGrath's Orange Lodge. That was the first achievement. The second achievement was to get into Tara. And the first meeting of Tara, he was identified by someone in the UVF camp who was at the meeting, and he was escorted from the meeting. And the person who escorted him from the meeting was someone that I knew. His name was Roy Garland, and Roy Garland was at one time very close to McGrath. So in 1972, you have a report there. That was from James Miller. And James Miller reported that McGrath had been accused of assaulting small boys. When it came a few years ago to the HIA inquiry, which again, as all public inquiries into Kincora were, they did not have the powers of the High Court to subpoena witnesses or documents, and particularly that suited MI5. So when Sir Anthony Hart saw James Miller's report, he said perhaps they didn't know whether that was physical abuse or sexual abuse. Well, if they'd asked the police would have said, well, we've been up there many times and the allegations are of sexual abuse. But MI5 didn't inform the police that it had this secret surveillance operation ongoing on the loyalist community. And if you look now at
this new document, yes,
we now have MI5 have denied that they had William McGrath working as an informant or as an agent. But the last paragraph in a report that was prepared by Army Intelligence, which is closely linked to MI5, it makes it quite clear that, in fact, there's very serious indications that McGrath was passing information to the security
and that
services.
He had been investigated for sexual assaults, or certainly allegations of that against young boys.
Well, you have to ask, why have the British and MI5 gone to such lengths? And it is an extraordinary, the lengths they've gone to to bury the truth about what they knew or didn't know about Kincora. Anthony Hart says they didn't know until 1980 that there was sex abuse going on. That's not possible after you see this document.
They knew in 1972 there was sex abuse going on, and they knew, and William McGrath is also confirming that he was their agent. They put him in there at a time when they knew that was going on, and we have sort of assumed the reasons why, I think are fair to say, that information is power, isn't it? And that's really what they are running on. And I suppose really they didn't care. It was like the sexual abuse was just completely secondary.
Yes, their immediate priority was to understand what was happening in unionism and loyalism. And in 1975, there were two opportunities for MI5 on one hand and for the RUC on the other to begin a proper investigation at Kincora, but they both rejected that. And MI5, to this day, make sure that they do not get brought before a tribunal where they have to answer the truth. In fact, Hart, in his inquiry, which took place in Northern Ireland, because if the people that he wanted to subpoena weren't in Northern Ireland, if, like MI5, they were in London, they couldn't be compelled to provide documents for people. So everything was on a voluntary basis. And that's supposed to reassure us. But one document that Hart got, and he excelled himself in finding a way out of this, he was given the minutes of a meeting, a very serious meeting in London of senior MI5 officials who were trying to decide how to deal with George Caskey's third investigation, which was a secret investigation into two former British employees, Fred Holroyd and Colin Wallace. And one of the MI5 officers said at the meeting, and it was minuted, why don't we give Caskey false files? Now, your first question would be, and mine would be, oh, have you done this before? How often? What were the occasions? None of that from Mr. Hart. You know, he said that this was put forward, but it wasn't a serious suggestion, and he wiped the slate clean. I'm afraid I don't agree with that. And there's recent evidence that the MI5 can tell lies to a court, and they have done. They're in trouble at the moment about that, having been exposed by a BBC report. So I think it's very difficult to accept anything that MI5 say. They make it difficult. It's the MI5 link that has perpetuated the Kincora story to the point where now Kincora files are locked away until 2065 in one instance and 2085 in another instance.
And how abnormal is that? I wanted to ask you, that length of time.
I'm not aware of...
So the 85 date, the 2085 date, would be more than 100 years since this scandal essentially broke.
So is that not a good way to
make sure everybody's dead and gone and maybe no interest in it anymore?
Yes. Will they actually, in 2065 or 2085, will they actually reveal anything?
Yeah.
Or will they say, oh, nobody's there of any interest?
And there'll be a whole new generation of people that will be in charge of the revealing of the documents in the first place. Lord Henry Mountbatten obviously gets a big shout out in this book. And it's quite fascinating, the whole story of him, his background, obviously, and what happened to him here in Ireland ultimately when he was killed by the IRA. But in 77, is it, he arrives in Ireland. From his travels, God knows where, in Burma, this is a guy, this is a member of the royal family. Is he a cousin of the Queen's?
Yes.
Yeah. So he floats around countries and basically gets sort of leadership of them for periods of time and, lives a very elite, bizarre life. And he rattles up to Northern Ireland. Is he visiting this Earl or...
His family, his wife's family, had a castle in Sligo at Mullaghmore, and that became the family's regular summer holiday. They would come there and spend the entire month, usually of August.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were able to prove, when we got the allegations about the abuse of boys in 1977 in the summer, what we heard was from Richard Kerr, and his friend Stephen Waring, who sadly is no longer with us. He allegedly threw himself off a boat coming from Liverpool to Belfast. And there were 5 boys at the time in the summer of 77 who said that they had been sexually interfered with by Lord Mountbatten. I have spoken to 3 of those boys personally. I went to Australia to interview one of them. Richard Kerr speaks for himself, but he also told me that his partner in visiting in the summer of 77 was Stephen Waring. Now, I found, since the book was published, I found another person living in the Irish Republic, a dark-skinned boy, because apparently Mountbatten favoured young boys with dark skin. And this person says that he was sexually assaulted by Mountbatten in London when he was in social care in a council area in London. So there's 3 people out of the 5. Now, the thing about it is I know who one of the others is. I've got a photograph of him because he was also a friend of Richard Kerr's. The thing about this is I cannot prove definitively that Mountbatten abused any boy. But what I am asking is Mountbatten the reason for this secrecy and this utter devotion to keeping the truth from us? Is that why? Because when the secret services in Britain were set up in 1909, one of their principal jobs was to safeguard the monarch and the monarch's family. And I wonder, is that what lies behind all this secrecy?
And the significance of that year, 1977, is that McGrath is now firmly embedded there over a course of 5 years, that he is an MI5 informant, and that they have an operation, a surveillance operation essentially, on what's going on at Kincora and what type of men are, utilising these vulnerable boys. So we know that's going on. And the suggestion is that Mountbatten comes into the mix, that he's visiting some very wealthy family members, and that he possibly drives himself into East Belfast and makes use of this service that has been offered over the course of 4 nights. Again, people could pick holes in that he wouldn't drive himself, that he wouldn't, etc. But he does have a reputation for getting away from his security and to like doing that sort of thing. So the facts are, you're constantly weighing up the facts, aren't you? You're building essentially a circumstantial case in the same way the police would in court. You don't have you don't have that confession. You don't have that piece of DNA that completely links everything. But you do have all these strands of evidence that are coming together in a rope, which is a very strong case that all of this has happened. And the strength of it is basically, the book. People don't publish pie-in-the-sky conspiracy theories. This is a book that's been your life's work. And this is your summation of what has happened. But Mountbatten, of course, would explain why MI5 all these years and well into the future are protecting the secrets of Kincora.
Well, I was able to check with others about Mountbatten. There's evidence, for example, in a book that was written by Andrew Lowney about the Mountbattens, in which witnesses to an FBI investigation told the FBI that the Mountbattens, Lord and Lady Mountbatten, were of low moral fibre. She had an interest in having affairs with other men, particularly black men, and he had an interest in children. That was what the FBI were told. When Andrew Lowney went back to ask some more questions under another Freedom of Information, the FBI had been closed down. He believes that was because of the British asking FBI to not release any more.
As a favour, basically.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
You know?
Keep royalty in the clear.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And so that, I mean, whatever it is, I can't answer the question. And even after 45 years of looking at this, I can't answer the question as to why and how. But the people who are involved in the sex abuse of these children, that disgusts me. Children don't deserve to lose their innocence in this way. It can never be replaced. You steal stuff from my house, my car, my video, I can replace those. But what was stolen from those children can never be replaced. And I get very angry about the way in which our society does not yet understand how horrific that is and how life-changing that is for children going into adulthood.
For sure. I mean, you see people in addiction over years and various other mental health problems, and it can often all stem back to an incident that happened in their childhood.
Yeah.
What happened in Kincora was the stuff of horrors. I wanted to ask you interviewed a number of the victims in this case, but you also interviewed McGrath. Did you meet him?
Yeah.
What was he like? And what age was he? And what happened to him? What happened to the three of them after the sentencing in 1980s? And was Kincora closed? Sorry, I wanted to ask you that.
Kincora was closed in April 1980. It had its
Never to reopen.
Never to reopen. It wasn't knocked down until about 3 years ago.
Right.
It was flattened. McGrath was one of those people who was... I could see why people said he was charismatic and he was a good speaker. I met him after he'd served his 4 years in prison. Well, 2 years, because there's 50%.
So in the mid-80s you met him?
I met him in 1990, actually.
Right.
And I went to where he was living in a place called Ballyhalbert. And I'd asked in the local shop, could they tell me where he lived? And the lady in the shop said, "Oh, we're not telling you, but you're probably a reporter." And I said, "Yes, I am." But she said, "Well, Willie McGrath's a fine gentleman. We all like him here." Okay. So I sat outside in the car and lo and behold, there he is walking towards me. And so I get out of the car and I have a brief 15-minute chat with him.
Yeah.
And had I not got the knowledge of William McGrath from all of those people who knew him, he would have been able to pull the wool over my eyes. I'll give you the example. I asked him if he was regretful that he was so close to Ian Paisley. And he said, I didn't really know Ian Paisley. And I said, but you went to see the Northern Irish Prime Minister with Paisley. Well, maybe. And I said, and what about Paisley's church? Were you a member there? No, I was never a member there. I said, well, two of your children were married, and the officiating clergyman was Ian Paisley, and it was in Ian Paisley's church. Okay, yes, it was.
So have you not got that information back up? He would have.
He wasn't going to admit it.
So typical paedophile, really, they think they can outwit you. There's a narcissism there, isn't there? That they're more intelligent than everybody else. Was he back with the wife and accepted back into the fold into his community, despite pleading guilty to those offences?
He may have tried to re-emerge as a political figure.
Did he? Yeah.
Warning about the peace deal that was in the offing, but no. He wasn't accepted back. He tried to get back into the Orange Order, and even though his own son was a member of the order, that was turned down. He was rejected by the Orange Order. His family took him back. His wife stood by him, because when I met him in 1990, I went to his front door and his wife was standing behind him. But she, just when he was about to open up a little bit more, she tugged him away from the front door, and he never again made himself available for me to speak to. So, yes, his family took him back. I think it was difficult for some of his family. I mean, Frank Miller was an Irish Times correspondent in London for many years. Frank married one of McGrath's daughters in Paisley's Church. And I think it was difficult for members of the family to accept that McGrath had all these different compartments in his life.
I thought you were going to say to accept a journalist into the family.
No, no, he was also the secretary of the Unionist Party at the time as well. So yeah, I'm not sure how that all went in the confines.
But had he lost his power?
Oh yes, definitely had
his
lost
power politically. Yes, but again, he was, you talk about him having different compartments in his life. Was there fears that, they're paedophiles for life. They don't do a couple of years in prison and stop.
I agree with that. And I think that's one of the problems that our society doesn't recognise. But I'm not aware of any activity by McGrath. I mean, when he came out of prison, I think he was in his mid-60s, 64, 65. So I'm not sure that he would have had any access or any interest in finding young boys. But he had been a homosexual. And I questioned him about that. Because I said, you've seen the police doctor's report. And he said, yes, I've seen that. He said, it's not a word of truth. If I was to tell you the story of Kincora, the word sex wouldn't be in it. And I said, well, that flies in the face of what the police doctor found about you when he examined you, and you're aware of that. And he said, yes, we have to accept.
What did the police doctor find about him?
The police doctor found that his anus showed regular sexual activity.
And they were able to examine somebody like that?
Yes.
In those days, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah.
And not
okay.
only that, the police doctor said that when he was examining McGrath got an erection.
Right.
McGrath acknowledged this when I spoke to him. I didn't go into
But he thought this was all lies and made up. Or
yes.
That's how he was dismissing it.
Yes.
Yeah, like everything else. So clearly he wasn't going to tell you about Mountbatten then.
No, he wasn't. And I had no idea that he would have known Mountbatten. But with his friendships and when he was a member of Tara, he frequently went to London, and he told his followers that he was going to important meetings of what was called the Belfast London Committee. And he was there to contribute and to listen to what they predicted. Now, MI5's job in the modern world was to advise the government as best it could about what is going to develop in the next 5, 10, 15 or 20 years. And so McGrath was able to come back from those meetings, and he would tell his followers, this is going to happen. And one of the things, as I said, was, the invasion of the border incursion by the Irish Free State government. And then he would tell them there's going to be blood in the streets. Well, maybe anybody could have predicted that. But
preachery stuff, in a way.
Pardon?
Some of it a bit preachery stuff, yes. Which is what he was.
That's exactly what he was. Yeah. And he would tour Orange Hall.
Hell and brimstone kind of stuff.
Yes, Doomsday. He constantly referred to Doomsday. And Doomsday, in his view, was the day in which the IRA and Republicans would rise up and take Ulster from I mean,
Yeah.
Ulster's a bastardised 6-county state. The real Ulster's the 9 counties, but for the Northern Protestants, it's the 6 counties. And he was very much aware that there was a big threat coming to Northern Ireland and to the place of Northern Ireland within Britain.
Now, you're still getting documents on this story, and you're still getting, and there will be, before 2000 and whatever, 85, there might be somebody, a whistleblower somewhere that'll come forward. You've spoken to people who were in MI5, you've spoken to people who were involved in the criminality of this case, the victims. Is there a particular individual out there that you'd love that they would just tell you everything before they shuffle off their mortal coil?
Yeah, I would love it if there was such a person. I don't believe there is anymore, because a lot of the individuals, 2 individuals who were in Kincora, one of them was Clint Massey. Clint Massey's now deceased. Arthur Smith, the survivor of what he says was Mountbatten's abuse in Kincora in 1977, they both talk about being upstairs and hearing the hubbub of people on the ground floor and hearing a lot of English accents. And Arthur Smith said, the only English accents I'd heard before this were from soldiers on the street. So he was, and he described waking up, having been given what he thought by McGrath was a drug to make him less objectionable and more easily pliable to whatever it was the men in Kincora wanted to do. So he believes that his body ached the next day, and he believes that he was tied up because there were marks on his wrists. So that's the kind of information that some of the boys would supply, and they claim that there were strangers coming to the house and that they were allowed to have sex with some of the residents. Not all of them, but some of the residents.
Some of them. The story is so dark and intriguing and, full of secrets and intelligence and spying and everything. And it must be very hard to keep yourself normal when you sort of delve into that world, because you do have to really, to write a book in particular, it's like a torturous exercise if you ask me, but I still do it. But it is you really have to get yourself really deep into the weeds of a story to write a book and to have the knowledge to be able to talk about it. And I mean, it's a story you've been covering for decades, as I say. So I think I would go absolutely mental with all that secrets and spies. And
I had
you
difficulties.
haven't, obviously, Chris, have you?
No, I have.
Yeah.
I mean, when I did the book about Brendan Smith, the paedophile priest, I didn't turn anyone away after that. I felt that I owed any survivors of abuse the time to talk to me. And I said, I would stress to them, I'm not a social worker. I'm a good listener, and I can maybe direct you as to where to go. And it got to the stage when my first granddaughter came into this world, and she was staying with me and my then wife. And my wife said to me one day, how come I change all the nappies?
Right.
And I said, well, I can't touch
the whole thing was getting to you,
Yeah. So I had to back off for a time.
Yeah.
But my commitment to children and to the survivors of such sexual abuse brought me back in, and I've been able to cope with it ever since by concentrating on the reason you're doing this is to protect children and to make society aware that they're not doing enough for those adults who were in their childhood raped and sexually abused.
In this awful cover-up as well, because that must really...
That hurts.
I mean, that's how you'd feel, like you were a pawn, like you were used, like the monarchy and all that goes with it is... And of course it has existed for centuries as this elite institution, which is always covered up.
I'm afraid that is the truth of it, that when children find the courage, even if it's in their adult lives, to come forward and tell the truth, to be treated the way they are when they see the offender going into court and being found guilty but being given an 18-month suspended 2-year sentence. That doesn't make them feel that it's been worthwhile.
No.
The pain, they relive the pain of the childhood. And what hurts even more, as you just pointed out, is the fact that society covers up for the abusers. And that should not happen.
I think that's even more disappointing.
Yes, it is.
It's the most disappointing. It's the amount of people prepared to do that for the sake of their pension. And there's not enough people really with the moral compass.
Yeah.
You'd like to think you have. But, you know, people being faced with that, they are threatened, these people, that if they speak, if they say anything, they'll lose their job, they'll lose their pension.
Yeah.
We don't know the circumstances they're in as well. So it's all just awful.
Well, I can give you an example of that. I had a good friend who was a press officer in Stormont. He often helped me when I was doing Kincora stuff. But one day, after the programme went out on BBC Two in 1990, I casually said to him, you know, I'm more and more thinking that the Northern Ireland office is just a cover for MI5 guys. That they have civil service jobs, but they're actually not civil service. And I didn't think any more about it. But suddenly he stopped taking my calls. And I eventually found him in a public place and confronted him. I said, what's going on? I mean, and he said, I asked that question about the Northern Ireland office. And I was taken aside by an MI5 officer and told to shut up, to leave you alone, and to stop asking questions if I wanted to keep my job and my pension.
There you go. Yeah.
And he sadly, he's passed away, but I was outraged. And he had a warning in that, and that was in 1990. Shortly after I disappeared to England for 2 years to let the dust settle, I just thought, you know, it's not worth it, but I can't stop.
Yeah.
I can't stop now. MI5 know the truth of it. You know, why don't they just be manly and courageous enough to stand up and say, we made a mistake?
And like, would that bring this word closure, which is a little bit too regularly used, but would it bring closure, I imagine, to some of the victims, but to you? Because it must be a torture to be constantly guessing the proper end to the story, but you don't really know it. It's quite torturous, that, I imagine.
It is a real pain in the backside, quite frankly. And right now, since the publication of the book, there are strange things happening.
I can imagine.
Like, I got an email from an English newspaper day before yesterday asking me I'm suspicious why they want to know about Mountbatten.
Yeah.
And why they want me to talk about the survivors. I've seen other emails a solicitor got from somebody who also wants to talk about Mountbatten. There's a book being advertised on
Yeah, that
Amazon.
is so weird. Yeah, let's just have that here. So when you go on to buy your book, Kincora, Britain's Shame, and the cover isn't dissimilar on this.
No.
You know, it's not dissimilar. It's the same kind of colouring. It's called Kincora's Lost Boys. We shouldn't be giving this publicity, but anyway, the real book is called Kincora, Britain's Shame by Chris Moore. And this one has been advertised with a slightly different name. And it's a 90-page book that is a meaningless piece, really, of literature with no author. But it looks as if somebody has placed it there in order to thwart the sale of your own book, or perhaps people looking to read it will buy this thing and it turns out to be a nothing?
Well, there are two ways of looking at this. One is, and somebody pointed out, there's a development in books now where AI is used, where books are published based roughly on what's in a properly sourced book, such as mine. It came out, that book that's on Amazon came out 8 days after my book.
Yeah.
There's a reference.
So someone has roughly put this together through AI
Yes.
or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's not a book properly investigated like your own over the decades, and with all those travels you went on and the conversations you mentioned. Your book is proper, real deal investigative journalism. But strange things are happening, as you say, since it came out. And I mean, you must be bloody paranoid.
I've never really been a conspiracy theorist, but
you're becoming one.
I'm rapidly becoming one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just strange. But look, as I said, the book Kincora, Britain's Shame, which is available in bookshops and on Amazon and wherever you get your books, by Chris Moore. And it's a fantastic read. It's an amazing story. And really, it has an ending in one way, I think, which is your, very relevant theory, which has been brought together from, all those decades of hard work and a true understanding of the story that you've tackled in this. Whether or not you or I live to 2085, if I do, which I would be in my, God knows, 100 plus, I will rush in and get it.
Yes.
Those documents.
Thank you very much for
and
being
in the meantime,
witness.
Anybody out there with any information on that story, any more further relevant information on Mountbatten, on MI5's involvement in Kincora, contact Chris Moore, and I'm sure you're available on social media.
Social media.
Like myself, you've probably been on the same number. I think
I've
half
had
the country.
half
the country has my phone number.
Yes,
it's no secret.
I've had the same number since I first took a contract way back in 80s.
Yeah, love it.
89, something like that. Yeah,
it's the way to be. People know where to find you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much indeed.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.